Mr. Alex Osenenko. How are you doing, my man?
Mr. Steve Rozenberg, I'm doing fantastic, sir. And you?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. I'm doing good on this. Well, it's raining here a little bit.
Ah,
And
yeah,
Texas.
man. I couldn't get to the office because, as soon as it rains, as you say in California, somebody gets in a crash and it like blocks the whole freeway, and the whole thing goes to.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't think my day through because I'm on my motorcycle, so I kind of hate. I don't mind riding in the rain, but I don't like riding in the rain in a thunderstorm because then you got the wind and stuff, and it adds more variables to my problems.
Yeah, man. I used to ride a lot. Don't do it anymore. But you know what I'm really excited about today?
Okay.
Our guest and our show and our topic. I think this is gonna be one of the best episodes. If folks have never watched Line Leadership Den show, and they're like, wow, this guy Alex has no mic. He's at home. He didn't make it to the office. Maybe it won't be as good of a show, but I'll assure you, dear audience, this is going to be a good one, right, Steve?
Yes, this is definitely going to be a good one. So this is Steve Rozenberg and my good friend Alex Osenenko. And we've got a very interesting guest today that's going to be pretty thought-provoking, actually, which I'm kind of interested to hear what he does and kind of how he does it. Just a little bit about our show. This show is on iTunes. It's on Google Play. It's on all that. What we're trying to do is we are trying to create content for the entrepreneur. And we've learned that Alex and I know firsthand as entrepreneurs, sometimes you're in the heat of battle, you're in the grind. Sometimes the technician in you comes out and you lose sight of growing the business, right? And you're always trying to grow this thing. And sometimes you get deep into the weeds and you lose sight of working on the business and you start working in the business. And sometimes someone's got to pull you out of that, as we all know, right, Alex? And so that's why we created this show, is we created it so that people can look at this from an owner's perspective of being an entrepreneur and see what challenges other entrepreneurs have and kind of come up with different ways. And we've had some very successful people on this show that have told us how they've battled with, when they get punched in the face and things that they deal with. And that's kind of why we have that, because look, everyone gets punched in the face every now and then. It's a matter of how you deal with it, how you adjust to it, and how you kind of come out stronger on the other side. So today I'd like to introduce our guest. His name is Nick, and I'm going to hope I'm pronouncing this right. Raithel. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. And Nick has some interesting business that he does. And I will go ahead, Nick, why don't you tell everyone what you do, take a couple minutes, kind of what your business model is and how you work with people, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you guys as I get started here, Steve and Alex, you both, for having me on the show. Really looking forward to contributing to the audience. Answering then your question about my background, who I am, what I do. I'm the creator of a system called the 7-Hour Book. And the idea with that is that we're helping property management entrepreneurs and other entrepreneurs in general with getting out there and positioning themselves as thought leaders. And the way we're specifically doing that is by helping them to create a published book to establish themselves in their market within the span of just 7 hours of their time. So that's where the 7-Hour Book part comes in.
Nick, what is your background? By the way, let me theme this show. So those folks that are listening, I think at the end of the show, you should be able to walk away understanding how to position yourself as a thought leader and take sort of as much of a market share as you're willing to take in your particular area, in your space. And so, Nick, what is your background? This sounds very complicated, and it sounds that the thought leadership strategy in itself has a lot of different components. How did you come to it? What is your story that got you here?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a veteran of the advertising space, digital advertising more specifically. Got started doing copywriting, doing some Facebook ads, other forms of online advertising. But I've always had a fascination with books, and not just as a reader, but more importantly, how books can help to establish people and to help them achieve goals, really. a book, when you look at a book, some people see a set of pages with text printed on it, but it can be so much more, and it can be so much more transformative than that. Whether you're looking at someone like Tim Ferriss, who went from being, basically a not pharmaceuticals, but brain drugs entrepreneur, to suddenly after that, following the release of the 4-Hour Workweek, being a thought leader and someone on a completely different level. Book transformed him. So seeing people like that and how a book could transform them, I started to think about what applications there could be for people who are also entrepreneurs. The issue, though, that I consistently found was that people I would talk to who'd say, yeah, I should write a book, I should do that. The thing that always held them back was time. So I've always, as well, beyond books, been fascinated with time management and productivity, as I'm sure you guys and some of our listeners probably are too. How do you get more done each day? How do you hack that aspect of it? And when I was thinking about that, bringing in the component too of books, that's where the 7-hour book part began to gel, because it's like, how do we take some of the productivity aspects, time blocking and being more efficient, and apply them to the task of getting this book done, completed, making it work as a marketing tool?
So Nick, let me ask you this, because I've worked with Alex quite a bit on when I created ebooks, and I think Alex, you and I did like 7 of them. And then I'm actually finishing my own book that I wrote, and it took me a lot more than 7 hours. I'm very curious to see how you do that. But is the goal of having this book, so if I'm a property manager, if I own a company, right, and I'm an operator, I'm going, I don't have time. First of all, I don't have time to write a book. I don't even have 5 minutes, let alone 7 hours. But is the reason that you suggest doing this because when you write a book, you're the expert, and when you're the expert, people will come to you, which means basically you're going to get more business. So this is a marketing conversion tool. Is that what this boils down to for people?
Yeah, I would say on an overall level, that is what it would boil down to. And I would add something to that as well that I don't think gets nearly as much attention from people, is the idea of the thud factor. And a thud factor, as I describe it, is literally the thud that a book makes when it lands on somebody's desk. I mean, that is much more of a literal impact than a blog post or of a clever but short Facebook post, even a video potentially. That thud factor, where it's something physical, is going to resonate much more in the minds of your prospects and the people you're looking to reach.
Let's take a step back for a second, Nick. I want to sort of some of the things that you sort of teach and actually deliver is quite fascinating. Meaning that, if I'm a business that's never produced any sort of content in the past, you can show me the way to begin and actually build that thought leadership. And improve, increase my business, and be able to sort of take over the market and grow my business as large as I want it to be. But I wanted to take a step back and understand, like, in your opinion, for a company, for a small to mid-sized company, what is thought leadership? How do you define it as a definition? And sort of how do you think about it? Like, what does that mean to have successful thought leadership? Like, how does that work?
That's a great question. I think part of it in the initial stages is to pull in your focus a little bit and don't let that term thought leadership intimidate you. Because that can be, given how broad it is, a very intimidating term. I mean, when you hear the term thought leader, you could think of anyone from Seth Godin to potentially, if you're on the financial side, people like Dave Ramsey, in the personal finance space, Susie Orman. I mean, those people are certainly considered to be thought leaders. But then on the other stance, if you're looking in your local community, or the kinds of people you would see at RIA, Real Estate Investors Association meetings, the people who are standing up and giving talks, they're not nearly, in most cases I would imagine, on the same level as a Seth Godin or one of those other people, but they're also considered to be thought leaders. So thought leadership can be very relative. And I mention that because I think it's important to have it in mind to keep the term thought leader from being intimidating. Now, in terms of what thought leader means, answering your question more specifically then, I would say that it can be defined really from the simple standpoint of, are you the go-to person when people in your market, with market being a very broad or a very niche thing, depending on how you define it, but are you that go-to person who people are looking to when they have a question, or even when they're looking for a provider who can provide some sort of service, whether it's property management or something else? Are you that person? And if you are that person who's being sought out for your knowledge or for your services, then chances are you're very far along in the direction of being a thought leader if you're not there already.
Gotcha. But how does that translate into business? Because I bet our listeners are sitting there and thinking, okay, this is all grand. Thank you very much, Nick. I need to sort of see the connection between the thought leadership. How do I measure that? And, in business, in money in the door?
Got it. I totally see that. What is the ROI basically? What does this translate into in dollars and cents? Completely see that. And it's absolutely what you need to be thinking about. When, in terms of what that translates into, it translates into people hearing you. If you're doing a podcast or a video thing, we're talking about books right now, but if you're on one of these platforms presenting yourself, it translates into leads coming in, people filling out your contact form. Same thing with the book. It translates into people picking up the book, reading through it, going and accessing the lead magnets that you have in the book, if depending on how you structure your book, going to get your supplemental PDFs, your worksheets, whatever content you're using to connect the book beyond just being a book to your marketing machine and your lead funnel, and ending up in your lead funnel to then convert further from there to buying from you. That's how you measure it. So you measure it. Is my book out there? How many people are downloading it each month? How many people of those are getting into my funnel for other things, and then tracking it from there?
So,
Gotcha.
Nick, let me ask you a question. It sounds to me like what you're talking about is more of a branding move. Like, it's not necessarily a straight conversion tool. You can't say, like, I gave out 30 books, so I should get a conversion rate of 20% from my book. This is more of a, just like the podcast show and other things, you're really just branding yourself as an educator, as an expert. And so there's not necessarily going to be a direct ROI maybe with it, or at least quantifiable ROI, but you're just kind of saying that with a book, you are going to be considered the expert from a brand perspective. Is that safe, or are you saying I can actually quantify sales and deals because of the book?
I think it is going to depend on the person themselves. I would say as well that in certain cases, I think you can quantify it. And the example I would give of that would be people like Russell Brunson. I believe Frank Kern has done it as well. And anyone else who's employed the free plus shipping offer to build their audience from there. I think in those cases, those would be instances of someone being able to use a book and quantify it. And for those in our audience who aren't familiar with the free plus shipping, the idea was that marketers create a book, and it's a full-length legitimate physical book, which then people can download, and all they have to pay is for the shipping. Basically, the book is free, but you're paying the shipping cost, and that's how people get in your funnel and are essentially buying a product.
Well, and that's the concept. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the concept on that is second money is always easier than first money. So once they open their wallet and they've already committed to doing something, getting them to buy the add-on, it's like, do you want to supersize your fries, right? So once they've purchased and they've done that transaction, they're now a buyer. Getting someone to buy again is easier. It's kind of like getting in the property management business, getting a client to buy a second property from you, if they're happy with the first transaction, is much easier than going out and getting a new client. But let me ask you this. In the situation of this book, like you get someone who's a property manager, right? And again, I'll use that for this conversation. And they're like, they're out there slugging it out every day as a property manager. They're dealing with people yelling at them, screaming, all the problems go on. And they're like, I don't really have a story, right? They're that in their mind, they don't feel they have a story. They're like, I'm just a property manager who owns a company and I'm out slugging it out every day. How do you convince someone, or maybe not convince is the right word, but how do you convey to that person that, look, you do have a story. Everyone's story is different and you have a compelling story. Sometimes you got to bring that out. And so based on your 7-hour model, how do you do that in 7 hours?
Sure. In explaining the 7-hour model, I want to be clear that 7 hours is all that the person we're working with has to spend on it.
Okay.
So that's broken out over the calls. On our side, my team and I, we're spending way more than 7 hours creating their book and doing all of that. I don't even think anyone, period, on the creation side at least, could put out a book of any substance in just 7 hours.
Right.
But all they need to do is just 7 hours. Does that make sense?
It does.
So you take staged interviews, so not staged, but you take specific segmented interviews and you guide into that story. But I think Steve's question is relevant. You need to help our audience who are afraid to niche down and focus on a specific subset of an ideal and identify them as ideal client. Instead, a lot of them just go vanilla, everything for everybody, just because they don't want to miss somebody. Like, how do you help them think through building a brand story, Nick? I really want to understand this, unpack this as much as we can, because I think that will be helpful for our audience.
Yeah, you're going to want to start with that first and foremost by thinking about, what are you trying to get out of this ultimately? It's cliche as it might sound nowadays. You need to start with why. You need to figure out, why do you even want to have a book in the first place? Is this book going to drive people into your funnel? Is this book going to get you speaking at various conferences? What is the goal? And then based on that goal, which stories, if you're going to go in the story route, or which examples or which messages more broadly are going to be best for delivering that? So if you're looking to work the rounds at, let's say you want to get on the speaking circuit, and that's the goal, you want to do more speaking gigs, then maybe you're going to want to take some of those stories of getting your head bashed in, literally, or figuratively bashed in, each day in the trenches as a business owner. Maybe those are going to become the fodder for your book, and that's going to be what you build it on.
Yeah,
or,
but in this situation, these are people that are, again, most people are operators, right? They're not looking
run a business, right? They run a business,
right? So they're going, how does a book help me feed my kids? Basically, they're saying, me taking time out to stop running my business, to 7 hours, whatever they commit in a financial commitment. How does that translate into you saying, look, this is how the bottom line? Because again, like I said, I understand what you're saying and I agree. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book was because of exactly what you said. But the average, entrepreneur or business operator is just saying, I'm slugging it out every day, man. Like, I'm not going on stage. I can't even go see my kids, after school play because I'm working every day. So how do you translate what that book does? Because I think there's a lot of value in the whole educational platform of educating your clients, whether it's a video blog, an ebook. And Alex, Alex taught me a lot of that when I first got into this business, about creating yourself as the expert to separate yourself. So I think there's something there, but I think you've got to, in my opinion, you've got to sell the educational side to the people as to why it benefits them. And I don't know if you're translating that.
Yeah, and in regard to that, I will say, just in complete fairness to the audience, that there are certain cases where someone could look at it and be like, hey, you know what? A book is not what I need. Instead, I need to hammer Facebook ads or hammer Instagram. And that actually translates into the best thing for me. So I want to bring that into the conversation too,
Sure.
Because I feel like depending on the person, a book might not actually be what they need. But
yeah, that's true. So let me ask you this, I guess, just going along that line, and I know we're talking about the book, but can you help our audience understand maybe the steps that they should go through? Like, it's like, don't just jump in the deep end by saying, I'm going to write a book. Like, how do you help them say, look, the first thing you should do is get a phone with a camera. By the way, Nick, you should get a phone with a camera. But like, you get something, you say, look, this is the first thing you got to do. You got to create content. Now, I'll give you an example. Like, when we talk about doing content, video content, and people always ask me, where do you get all these, where do you get all these content ideas to create your videos? So my website, we've got like 300 videos that I've done for leads, right? Educational stuff. And my answer to them is, you have owners, tenants, and vendors that call every day that have an issue or a problem that they want solved. That is your content. Like, you have content every day. And that's what I try to explain to people. How would you explain to people where they can start on the baseline of getting the content just to do a simple video blog, or to make themselves the educator from a much lower level to lead up to where you're talking about doing?
With that, I would say make this very actionable. Pick up a pencil or a pen, a piece of paper, and draw a circle, and sort of doing a hub and spoke diagram, and draw out the lines of the things that you're always talking about. Kind of pivoting a little bit on what you guys were just saying with what are people always calling and complaining about, but in this case, what are you always talking about? So are you always talking about, say, well, aspects of property management? I don't want to go too much in the deep end in terms of stuff you guys talk in the lingo and the tech, but things that you're always talking about and educating people on, and that people look to you for, or that you find yourself always having to explain. And those begin then to be the subjects that could potentially be in the book, or in whatever other content you're doing. Or think as well about mistakes you see people making. That's another good one. What are the common blunders, whether it's property management or even just running a business in general? What are the common mistakes that you've made and that you see other people making? I would add as well, what annoys you? What are you just sick of seeing that you think someone should do something about, or someone should say something about? That becomes the basis for your content. Think about someone like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's always on social media, always doing the videos. Think about the number of explosive tirades and moments where he's clearly annoyed about something, and that forms the basis for some of his content. And then I think too, another point overall is to stop worrying about having the perfect idea. There is no perfect idea. Just get started. I think it was Zig Ziglar might have been the one who said this. You don't need to be great to get started, but to get started, you do need to be great. And it's the same thing here with your content. Just get started. Just go with what you can brainstorm and what you can come up with initially, and it'll only get better from there.
In my experience, Nick, ebook or a book for a property management company is a quiet, significant content asset that aids in conversion. So that it gives another reason for someone perusing the website to stick around a little bit more and see if their questions are being answered. There's the quality of the books vary, but in this sort of space, in this almost like brick and mortar business space, that seems to be the best use for that book. I don't know a single property management company, Steve, now you can chime in here if you do, that actually wrote a physical book and that had any success with it besides Renters Warehouse, who is, let's call it enterprise level compared to most of the listeners here.
I would agree. I mean, I wrote my book, but it's not actually, it's like within the next 30 days coming out. So I could dispute that later, but you're right. I mean, the average person does not. Maybe, we met Chris Clothier at your last convention. I believe he's written a couple books, but obviously those are outliers, right? Those are big time guys that are doing that. I don't know. I think, I think people write manuals, and I think they write, content for the operator. But I think that the disconnect, and I think what Nick talks about is, he's talking about creating something for basically establishing yourself as the expert and solving the problems that people have. And, you're building the brand as and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you're having them build the brand as the expert problem solver for particular problems that I know how to answer, right? And so by doing that, and I'm answering, I think that the challenge is that people have solutions, but it doesn't fix the person's problem. So they're kind of going the opposite directions, as opposed to saying, I have this problem, here's your solution, let's do business. And so I think that the book can maybe do that from an upper level of being the problem solver, maybe not their specific problem, but I think by doing a book or doing an ebook or doing that kind of stuff, it solves that. But I think it's definitely a higher level, right? Because you got to be able to step out of the business long enough to even think about it, let alone, I mean, look, Alex, you know from, FourandHalf, how hard was it just to get people to do videos? And let alone, I mean, that was, tough in of itself, but to get them to think about the book, like, I guess, Nick, let me ask you this. When you're talking to someone about creating a book, can you walk us through some of that, like the storyline that you want to follow? Because right now, I think a lot of people may think, I'm not book worthy, I don't have a life of a book, and you're probably saying you do, you just don't realize it.
No, it actually, in answer to your question, I'm not always saying you do. I really try to, I mentioned this earlier in this episode, but I really try to be fair with people when I'm talking with them and really trying to help to see whether they should do a book or they should not do a book. Quite often we find that they should do a book, but there is that room for determining if it does not make sense. And if it doesn't, I completely respect that. And we help them to figure out what a logical other approach would be beyond a book. In terms, though, of the conversation, if it does go in the direction of them deciding and determining that a book makes sense, we then get back to that. What are your goals? And what gold, basically, is a good way to put it. What gold do you have that you're sitting on that you can leverage and you can turn into the book material? And who are you looking to reach? That's another part of it. Are you looking to be the authority figure to people in just your community? Are you looking to, as you guys were saying, be the authority to people who are coming to your website online, who might not necessarily be in your immediate community, but are still interested in you and the solutions that you provide? So who is that audience? And building it upward from there.
Gotcha. Nick, what are some of the examples? I'm curious, what you've done this with a number of companies. What is the example of a circumstance when somebody, a business owner, does not need a book? Like, see if we can select, so our audience can self-select themselves in or out potentially into this channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example that comes to mind right now. Is a fellow, he's in one of the Midwestern states, a little bit further west, not quite California, but Utah or Nevada. I think I can leave it at that. But he's in Utah, Nevada, in the real estate space. And with him, he seemed like he might be needing a book. But then through the course of our conversations, we found that he didn't actually need a book. What he instead needed to do was just go to more RIA meetings. Just go to more RIA meetings and be a better judge of opportunities that he found there. So through that and through basically better networking is what it came down to. Better local networking, more active networking, not always putting off going to events because of his schedule. I mean, schedule is clearly a concern, and we're all, of course, busy. But in his case, he was letting that become an excuse that kept him and held him back from going out and networking in a good but a more aggressive way. So that would be one example. And then I've also seen other instances of people who really just did need to spend more money on advertising. Just plain and simple. They knew where their audience was. They knew how to target them and retarget them too, with retargeting pixels and that sort of technology. And they just needed to invest in just honest to goodness advertising.
But Nick, let me ask you this. Who would you say is your target client? Like,
what is the perfect, like on the other side? So this is who doesn't need it. Who needs it, Nick?
Who needs it? It's someone who, in the best of cases, has determined that yes, they do want to be a thought leader. Yes, they do believe that a book is the best channel for achieving that. And then from there, they would have written a book themselves, but they're simply constrained by the lack of time. Because I don't want to have myself and my team put our efforts toward helping someone who could do the book themselves, who, if maybe they just had a little bit more, I hesitate to use the word, but a little bit more discipline or self-motivation could just sit down on, say, a Saturday morning and hammer out a chapter each week. And that's very hard, I will completely admit. And that is something that does take discipline. But if someone has that, or they feel like they could muster that level of discipline, then that isn't necessarily going to be someone who our process is going to be a fit for, versus someone who really can't make time. It just completely snowed in, so to speak, with work. And so they do need someone to take it off their shoulders like that.
What's the example of a successful book campaign that you sort of underwrote for someone? Like what situation were they in? What situation they're in now? Maybe briefly, just kind of give us like the win. How does a win look like?
Yeah, what a win looks like is it looks like a entrepreneur in the multifamily space, multifamily real estate, and he's looking to do bigger deals, and he needs something in terms of thought leadership, basically to convince investors that, okay, you've done these deals and we're comfortable now contributing our money into the fund that you're raising and your syndication. And also he's looking to do coaching. He's looking to expand beyond just maybe mentoring one or two people to actually have full-fledged coaching. So in his case, a book comes into the picture as a tool that allows him to tell his unique story. He's got a very unique story. That's not always the case, though. You don't always necessarily need to have a larger-than-life story, but it does help. So he's able to tell his story. He's able to convey his investing philosophy within the multifamily space and share the components of it, what he looks for in deals, and essentially showing his audience that he's the expert when it comes to his niche, which in this case is multifamily. And
Gotcha.
from there,
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say, and then from there, the book comes out. He is sure to carefully market it. One of the big things, actually, while I am thinking about it, when it comes to book marketing, just a tip for your audience, is if you are going to market a book, make sure you get reviews. I mean, having that kind of social proof, whether your book is on Amazon or even if it's just having reviews on your website of people who have read the book and are approving of it, which was going to cause more people to enter their email for the book, that makes a huge difference.
Gotcha, Nick. Yeah. So I think the grand scheme of things, to wrap this up, I think Steve could be potentially your customer, those who are looking to expand, sort of already built a business that sort of grows and thrives. They want to sort of introduce even more authority, even more sort of a niche down, even more on their perfect client, get more highly qualified leads in the door, as well as turn their time and invest their time into teaching, educational speaking. That's what Steve's passion is about, right? He's really passionate about those things. Me, I want to run a business, man. I want to grow a big business. That is what I'm going to. So podcasting, videos, Facebook ads, as you mentioned, remarketing. Those are my dogs that I put in the fight. Book is probably something I would do when I'm Steve's age, like old and ready to.
Oh, ouch. Said that out loud, man.
Ready to just hang it up and just go speak, right?
Ouch. So, Nick, let me ask you this. If somebody wanted to talk to you in the future and they wanted to kind of get to know more about what you offer, how would they get a hold of you and kind of learn more about you?
Sure. Best place they could go would be our website, which is contentcore.net. It's contentcorps.net, contentcore.net.
Yeah, we'll plug it in the show notes. Nick, it's a pleasure having you on. Steve, as usual, it's been great co-hosting with you. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Be well.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks, you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.